Welcome to the New Chemist podcast. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, Amazon Music, and a variety of other platforms. Here on the New Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as careers, community research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is a good colleague and friend of mine, Kyle Wong. Thanks for joining me today. It is so good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Starting off at GE as a software test engineering intern, he progressed to Twilio as a software engineering intern. Then he progressed even more, serving also as an OMED team coach, then as a software engineer. Then he served as a co-founder and CTO at Shopper, also as a fellow at On Deck, and he is a part of the founding team, and he's the VP of Product and Engineering at Overflow. He was also recognized as a Forbes 30 under 30. He is really accomplished, a good colleague and friend of mine from Georgia Tech. Please welcome Kyle Wong. Thank you, Kyle, so much for joining me today. It's so good to have an accomplished guest such as you on this podcast. Just before we begin, Kyle Wong is a Forbes 30 under 30 recordee, or he was recognized under Forbes 30 under 30, as well as he's a part of the founding team and VP of Product and Engineering at Overflow. He's very accomplished. He was one of my buddies at Georgia Tech. Person of color, served well. He's majoring in computer science. Really smart guy. Really good to have him as a guest. So as we get started, what would you say have been your long-standing interest in the field of computer science?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. Super excited to be on here. And yeah, some of my long-standing interests in the field of computer science, like I can remember just being a kid. Maybe I don't remember the exact year, but whenever the iPod came out, I had to have this iPod, and just using it, I was intrigued. I'm like, how can I listen to music from this little device, right? And that has just always been interested in me, and how these products shape society. And so for the longest, I just always wanted to be an engineer at Apple. And so as I grew up and grew older, my parents noticed that I had kind of this knack for technology, and so they cultivated that through various summer programs and things like that. And that really helped expose me to the world of computer science, and how essentially you can tell a computer to do something, and even build businesses off of being able to code. And so that has always inspired me, and inspired everything I've done up until this point.
Okay, yeah, that's good, man. That's good. So, what would you say? What led to your desire to work in the field of computer science? Was it your upbringing? Was it the school you went to? How did that desire come about? And you mentioned your parents cultivated it, but how did the desire come about?
Yeah, I would say that the iPod, right? Seeing that, and then just seeing all the cool things you could do about coding. There would be TV shows where people are fake coding, but it's just still that exposure. Yeah. And I just thought it was really cool. I've always been really good at math. Okay. Although computer science isn't at least software engineering isn't a lot of it. Some of it uses math concepts, but not on a day-to-day basis. I'm not using that, but I've just always been an analytical thinker. Okay. And so, being analytical, and when thinking about career paths, when we were, I want to say we got a computer at my home when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And so my dad was always on the computer on AOL and, stuff like that. And so this is new technology. And so I was just fascinated, and I just wanted to know how computers worked and all of that. And so, just the plethora of exposure that I had from having a computer at home, and all those other things just really inspired me to want you can make a career by working on a computer. I thought that was cool. And then look at it today, everyone uses computer for their day-to-day job. whether or not you're, a computer scientist or programmer, or even if you're, in business, like have a strictly business kind of role. Like everyone uses a computer. And so I knew that's why I wanted to, be in this computer science field.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, man. That's really good. So, that's really good. So you saw people using it. You had instances in your life where you had samples of those technologies. That's good. So, Kyle, my question to you, I think most people when they see a LinkedIn profile, the question is, how have you been so successful? You were recognized by very notable magazine, Forbes 30 under 30. So, how have you done it? What has complemented to it? Can you describe to us the path to getting there? And how did you overcome the obstacles when you encountered them? Would you just share a brief story as to how did the academic path first, and then we can talk about the obstacles. So the academic path. Yeah.
So the path. So when I went to Georgia Tech, so the summer after my junior year, it was summer after my sophomore year of high school. Okay. I did this program at Georgia Tech through it was called LEAD at the time. Now it's called Summer Engineering Institute, and I believe it's still around. Okay. And what they do is they bring about maybe like 30 to 40 minority students, Black and Latinx students from around the U.S. to Georgia Tech, and you're there for 4 weeks on campus, and essentially you're kind of like taking classes. And so I'm a high schooler, and for me, like even just attending Georgia Tech seemed like a reach. Like I didn't think it was possible. I'm originally from Decatur, Georgia, and not many people from like where I grew up, my high school, would go to four-year universities, let alone Georgia Tech. And so I had that exposure after my sophomore year of high school through that program, and they exposed us to not only like computer science, but also like chemical engineering, and it was more so like just about engineering. Like what are the different fields and paths you can take in engineering? And I always resonated with like the computer science kind of computer devices type thing. And so when I entered Georgia Tech, I started off as computer engineering major, and the difference between computer engineering and computer science is that computer engineering is more hardware focused, whereas computer science is more software focused. So I always thought I wanted to do hardware, but the curriculum at Georgia Tech for computer engineering was very electrical engineering based. And so a lot of the classes that electrical engineers had to take, like digital signal processing, computer engineers had to take. And like, I didn't really like the hardware classes. I always thought I would, but I didn't really enjoy them. I didn't do the best in those. And, I had a friend that had an internship after his freshman year at Google in Mountain View, California, which is Silicon Valley. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So after my sophomore year, I didn't have an internship after my freshman year, but after my sophomore year, or during my sophomore year, I actually switched from computer engineering to computer science. And I had the opportunity to get an internship at GE in Salem, Virginia, it's a very small town. It was a cool internship, but I felt like I didn't learn a whole lot. And I realized the next internship I wanted to be in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, because I just feel like that's the heart of technology. And so every year, Georgia Tech has a career fair, and they have one specifically for the College of Computing. Yeah. And so the year is 2014. I had gone to the College of Computing career fair before. Every big company you could think of is there. You have Microsoft, Google,
the all these. Of Klaus?
You said what?
The lobby of Klaus?
Exactly. Yeah, and Klaus. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And so you have all these big tech companies, and you'll wait in line for like an hour because everyone wants to talk to these companies. You're missing class, and you'll wait in line for an hour. You talk to a recruiter for like maybe 5 minutes, then they just say apply online. And so it was like one of those. It was just like, dang, I just not wasted all this time, but I stood in line, missed class, just to apply online in this huge pool of candidates. So in 2014, I'm like, I was going to do it differently. So they have the smaller companies on the bottom floor. Mm-hmm. And so Twilio was one of those companies at the time. And at the time, I didn't even know what Twilio was. And for reference, Twilio is a cloud communications platform. So their API or their service essentially powers text messages and phone calls. So if you've ever gotten like text messages from like a business or say like appointment reminders from a doctor, all of those they're leveraging Twilio's technology to actually send those messages out. Or if you get like those automated calls, sometimes people abuse it, and so sometimes they're like spam calls through Twilio. But they really try to limit, like they have like a fraud detection team, and they're very strict about their policy. But of course, people are always going to abuse it. But anyway, I'm in this line. I talked to a recruiter from Twilio, and long story short, I'm able to finesse an interview. And good. I get the interview, and the interview goes well. And they were smaller at the time, and so I had to like keep following up. I'm like, hey, I really wanted this internship. Persistence. And I had an opportunity from Boeing as well for an internship. It would have been in Long Beach, California, which is in Southern California. But Boeing is, it's an aviation company, and I wasn't necessarily. I didn't want to be in aviation. I wanted to be in like high tech, Okay. And so that's why I kept following up about the Twilio opportunity. Yeah. And then they scheduled a few more interviews for me, which were like over like video. Right. And I did well, and I had the opportunity. I got an offer to intern at Twilio. So I interned there summer 2015 and summer 2016. And then after I graduated from Georgia Tech in December 2016, I moved out to the Bay Area to work for Twilio full time. And so I worked at Twilio for about 3 years, and I've always wanted to, pursue startups. But, I was like, after graduating, I had student loans and stuff like that. And I felt it would be hard to even pursue a business of my own if, with student loans. And so I'm like, okay, I want to get this taken care of. So I had the opportunity, through working at Twilio to like pay off my student loans. And then there came a time when I felt like I wasn't growing as much. And instead of like switching teams or like going to a new company, I'm like, this could be an opportunity for me to, start something of my own. I'm like, I'm young. I don't have any dependents. And so a friend of mine reached out to me about an opportunity that she was working on. It was her and her college roommate. It was very early. It was called Shopper. And they were looking for a technical co-founder. And the idea of Shopper was like on-demand delivery for clothes. So think like Uber Eats, but for clothes. So so that was like the idea. But and so we applied to Y Combinator, which is a startup accelerator. We didn't get in, but one thing they really wanted to understand was like, why do people need this, right? And we just hadn't done exactly. We hadn't done enough customer research, and then with businesses like that, like those kind of like delivery businesses, the logistics are difficult. You have to be efficient, and then also the unit economics don't make the most sense. Most delivery companies are unprofitable because, they're charging customers less than it really costs to actually do the job, right? And so that's why, you see a lot of these companies like Uber, they raise a bunch of venture funding to be able to cover those losses. And so we worked on that for a little bit, but we realized we weren't the right team to make it happen. And so walked away from it. And, when I left Twilio, I had given myself a year to try to figure things out. And so I left Shopper after about 3 months, and, I was just like, what's next? And I connected with, so when I first moved to San Francisco, I went to this church, I still go to it. It's called Vibe Church. And one of the co-founders of the church had just started a location in San Francisco. The main location is in Palo Alto, which is maybe about 40 minutes south of San Francisco. But the church? One of the co-founders of the church, they were starting a San Francisco location for the church. And so I went to the San Francisco location and had the opportunity to meet him. And, this is in 2017, so like 5 years ago at this point. And he's a super cool dude. Yeah, his name's Vance. And so I also served at the church too. Like, I served on like the capture team. So I took photos and stuff like that. And so I had the opportunity to work under his leadership. And so he and I stayed in touch. And when I was working on Shopper, he kind of had the idea for Overflow, which is what I'm working on right now. Okay. And, he and I stayed in touch, and he mentioned this founder fellowship program called On Deck. And what On Deck is basically a program where you bring a bunch of early stage founders together, and it's like it's like a community of startup founders at the earliest stages, and everyone can like learn from each other and all of that stuff. So he mentioned that he had done the previous cohort, and he referred me to do it for Shopper. And so while I was working on Shopper, I was on deck. And then, after I left, I'm like, what do I do next? He calls me one day and he says, hey, I'm interviewing for Y Combinator, which we had interviewed for Shopper. Mm-hmm. And he was like, I need some, can you give me some advice on, the interview? So I shared with him some advice that we learned based off of like our learnings from our interview. And so ultimately he comes back, he didn't get into YC. And a big reason is that YC looks for, they want you to have a technical founder, a technical co-founder, because they're like, if you're going to be able to build something, you need someone in-house that can do that. Mm-hmm. And so he and I ended up joining forces, and I joined the founding team of Overflow. And so we've been working on, and what Overflow is, our mission is to inspire the world to give. And we make it super easy for people to donate stock to nonprofits. Mm-hmm. And so most people have most of their wealth in non-cash assets, right? They may have like a percentage of their wealth in cash to cover like, day-to-day expenses, emergency funds, stuff like that. But otherwise it's in stock or like crypto. But most nonprofits are fundraising for cash, right? And so there's that misalignment. And with Vance being the CFO of the church, a lot of people that went to the church, they worked at tech companies like Google, Apple. And so majority of their wealth was in stock, and they were like, how can we give stock? And it just wasn't an easy process. Yeah. So that's how the idea came along. And then, I've also, when I was working at Twilio, I wanted to give away, donate Twilio stock to the church. And, there's just like a cumbersome process. So I knew the pain point that he was looking to solve. And so it was just kind of like a no-brainer to work there or work together. But a huge thing I would say in my journey is just like that stepping out on faith, right? Yeah. Where I left Twilio and I had nothing, I'm like, all right, I'm starting this from nothing. I had given myself a year and, Shopper didn't work out and I'm like, what's next? But I eventually figured things out and I landed on my feet, which was, a blessing in itself. And just, to get to the Forbes 30 under 30, it's just like a culmination of hard work. Like I always say, like I'm happy that I got that Forbes recognition. And I always say like a list doesn't define me, but it feels good to be recognized, right? Yes. And so like just seeing people, just working hard, building relationships with people. People have noticed like, the work I put in. Like I've tried starting businesses in the past, and I've done it all. And so it's just, I think people are just now starting to notice me, but I've been doing the work,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you bring up a lot of good points. I'm glad you shared that story. So just to touch on it, I'll kind of go from where we just left off. You said people are just starting to notice you. Seeds are planted in the ground, but they have to become radical. The radical has to go down, then the plumule has to come up, and it has to shoot up to form the shoot, and then the radical goes down to form the root. So that's an analogy based on germination. We tend to not notice things until they have been developing or have developed to a very obvious level. So that's that. Also, you mentioned how the utility of the ideas came about through the needs in the environment. Yep. So the value proposition came about through the needs in the environment. That's good. And then, a number of things. You said stepping out in faith. We could have a whole discussion on that right there. But that'll be another episode later on. Sweat equity in terms of your work experience. So it took time. In essence, it took time for you to achieve what you achieved and to develop the skills and acumen, the maturity, if I may say so, to really walk in the fulfillment of the ideas and promises and whatever the case may be. So that's good. That's really good. So how do you maintain a view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general? Do you have a faith perspective? What's the foundation on which you see your life, or the lens in which you see obstacles in your career and in your personal day-to-day living?
Yeah, no, faith is it plays a huge role, especially when it comes to startups. Startups, they're, very fast paced. There's a lot of uncertainty or
uncertainty.
Uncertainty, yes.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I was like, what's
Make your own words. You've earned it.
Yeah,
Make your own words.
A lot of uncertainty, right, in startups. And, is you're literally moving by faith, right? And you're like, this is our hypothesis. This is the world we see, right? We see a more generous world in the future, and it's like, how do we make that vision come to pass? And like in the day when you're in the day to day in the minutia, it's hard to like see the bigger picture. And there's even times where I'll beat myself up, and I'm like, dang, we haven't achieved as much as we want to achieve, and there's so much more work ahead. But even when I just sit back and look back where we were a year ago in the business and to where we are now, it's like, I'm like, damn, we've actually done a lot. So it's very useful, every once in a while to always like take that, to zoom out and just look at the bigger picture as opposed to, getting stuck in the day to day. So that's often a tool that I do use whenever, things get frustrating. It's like, take a pen out and then just, trusting God personally, as like being a man of faith, like knowing that things are going to work out the way they need to. And, just seeing how my path, from college to getting out here is just one of those things where it's like, even if there are some missteps, I'll ultimately be redirected along the way, just kind of like a GPS, right? You're being rerouted.
So again, this is a really good conversation. I feel I'm gonna have to listen to this episode again because this is inspiring. So for example, you said redirection. I think it's all a part of the plan, and when you have a faith perspective, it allows you to account for the difficulties, account for the uncertainties. And how I like to say it is, in my personal life, because I'm a person of faith as well, I think my faith allows me to parameterize or break down the uncertainty into parameters in which I look at every element, and I'm able to reinforce my ideas, reinforce what I believe in the situation. So that's that. And then also, you bring up the issue of when you face frustrations, your faith comes into play. So yeah, that's really good, really commendable. Yeah. So how have you been adaptive and creative in the field of computer science? Where have you added your flair? Where do you see your spin on things? What ideas that you thought of or implemented? How have they been developed?
So a few years ago, I kind of adopted this tagline that I'm building dope technology for the culture. Okay. And so, being a software engineer and then being like a Black software engineer at that, like, is very rare. There's a lot of Black software engineers out there, but in the grand scheme, like, if you look at the entire pool of software engineers, like, we're a minority, right?
That's fair.
So one thing that I've always wanted to do is build dope technology for the culture. And so when it comes to like, work, I try to, apply that different spin and, kind of swagger, so to speak.
How do you find the right environments for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually?
I think community is huge for me, and I think especially for everything I do, I always try to find people that are like 1 to 2 steps ahead of me, that's able to kind of like just help guide me. I'm able to learn from their experiences, their mistakes that they've made, and also their successes, and so that's huge for me. And then also just like friends, like so my best friends, they also went to Georgia Tech, and they're also out here, and they're also in tech, and so they're working at startups, at tech companies, and so just being able to like learn from their experiences, and then just being part of like various communities. So like the On Deck, like that community has been huge in terms of like just learning and growing, as well as this organization called Dev Color that I'm in, which is essentially like a peer-based network for Black software engineers.
One more time, can you repeat it?
It's a peer-based network.
Oh, peer.
Yeah, peer, like PER. Yeah. Okay. So peer-based, and so it's like everyone's like equal. And the cool thing about Dev Color is that the idea is they have this thing where they say you don't give advice, you share experiences. And so all of that stuff has been super helpful with me, like adapting to this industry.
Good. And that's kind of the same approach that I've taken in the formation of the Chemist company. When it comes to pair advisors, it's not really advice, but sharing experiences, ideas. It's almost as if information synthesis is occurring. and that's it. So information synthesis, and then refining and distilling that so you produce a really good seminal product that's based off of scientific insight, business ideas, and hopefully some good reasoning. So that's good. Kyle, I would ask you this. Do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field you're currently working in? What's your advice to someone who sees what you're doing, and probably won't be able to interact with you in person, but they hear this episode and they're like, I really would appreciate, or I really could use some advice from a person of color who's achieved recognition on the Forbes list, who also went to Georgia Tech and has been proficient as a computer scientist. So you can speak in a lot of spaces, but for that particular person, what would your advice be?
Yeah. So, disclaimer, no person's, everyone's path is going to be different, right?
Exactly.
And so for me, if I were to extract like the basic principles from my experience, the first thing is like, what's your vision, right? So starting there, understanding, what you want to do, what you want to be, right? And then from there, creating that plan. And so for me, I always knew I wanted to do technology. And so that was, kind of what led me to Georgia Tech. But say, for example, people are even, going on non-traditional career routes, right? Say you're already in the workforce, but you want to navigate to software engineering, or even like building your own company. I think being in those non-traditional routes is totally fine, but I would encourage, that person to reach out to those people that are doing the things that they want to do, just to gain some perspective and know if it's something you really want to do, and as well as knowing what all it takes to do it. And then I think once you do that and you're solidified on your vision, I think it's just one of those, this is where you execute, right? And I feel like the execution, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of it's unseen. And I love when you use the seed analogy, right? We can learn a lot from nature.
Oh yes, creation speaks.
Yeah, exactly. And so
there is no language.
Once you have that vision, just executing and just having faith that that things will work out, and if they're meant to be, and then you'll be rerouted otherwise. So that's essentially has been my playbook from start with that vision, find people that are doing it, execute, right? And so that's my playbook.
A lot of execution. So yeah, that's good. So what you bring up, I'm a person of faith, so there's a quote in the scripture that says, Habakkuk 2:4, write the vision, make it plain. So that's good. That's very good. And also, I believe, or I've come to understand that many times as we walk through life, though we encounter obstacles, if we have a vision in mind, it helps us to stay motivated, even when we encounter challenges. Because we know this is where I'm looking. I can think out, this is how I see it. I can think out of my circumstance, or think beyond the challenge, or look beyond it, because I see in the distance, I see the horizon, I see the sun coming up over the horizon, and I can press on towards that. So that's good. What's been some of the most beneficial advice you have received?
I would say the most beneficial advice that I've received has been, I think, is not being afraid to fail. I would say
fail forward.
Exactly. And I know like Mark Zuckerberg, when he was first starting Facebook, they had this slogan like move fast and break things. And I think it's natural to have like a fear of, failure.
Yeah, we're human.
Yeah, it's human. But I think the quicker you get to failure is the quicker you get to success. And pretty much success is just an accumulation of failures. And so, the biggest advice I've kind of had is that, be okay with like failing, because it's an opportunity to learn.
Exactly.
And so I think that's like the biggest thing that we can take away from failing is just that learning. And then the next thing is that, like, I guess a piece of advice is just that no one knows what they're doing. I feel like, we're all kind of like learning, even like some of the biggest companies you can think of, sometimes they're put together by duct tape, like their processes. And you would think that like, these really big companies are polished, but like no one, knows what they're doing. Well, I don't want to say no one knows what they're doing, but we're all learning.
Yeah, we're all learning.
We're all learning, and
nothing is perfect.
Exactly. And we're all like, adapting to pretty much based on the information that we have at that current moment.
Yeah, so I agree with what you're saying. We're constantly iterating and improving what we're doing, our practice, our mode of action, our thinking, our mental models, all those things. There's a lot of iteration that's going on because the world changes. Nothing stays the same. We live in a dynamic world. And for you to stay the same all the time, I don't think it complements to you progressing and advancing in this world. So that's that. And then also you mentioned the thing about failure. I think evaluated experiences, even when you fail in those experiences, and non-repeating failures complement a lot to success. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, you could fail, but if you repeat, that presents a challenge. But if you fail, you address it, you learn from it, and you start to work around or above or beyond it, I think you start to progress even more towards your vision. But thank you so much, Kyle, for joining me today. It was so good to have you on. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I.